I think we've got a huge problem when it comes to my profession, and I don't know quite how to play it. Because what you don't, I mean, let me give you a little bit of a personal testimony. I don't know, right? Nobody knows. Science is an attempt to understand. It comes from the Latin scientia, which means knowledge. But science isn't knowledge. Science is the application of knowledge to circumstances. Science is, by definition, wrong. And by that, I simply mean that it is always capable of being superseded when more evidence becomes available. It's the best available explanation for the observable evidence. Okay, that is what science does. Radio presenters and newspaper columnists, in many ways, do the exact opposite. Radio presenters and newspaper columnists take knowledge, information, manipulate it, mould it, shape it to elicit from you, the consumer, the biggest emotional reaction. Okay, that's tabloid sensibilities in a nutshell. One or two of us have managed to find a way to employ similar tactics to do the work of the angels, but usually it's work that is designed to either frighten, enrage, or manipulate you, usually wrongly. The enemies that you're told exist generally don't exist, which is why they move so effortlessly from firefighters to junior doctors to single mothers to trades unions to Greta Thunberg to Meghan Markle. It doesn't really matter who the enemy is as long as there's an enemy. Now, that isn't just confined to media mouthpieces and newspaper columnists and, of course, deeply irresponsible, dangerous politicians. This could be best described as populism. Now, populism is about persuading people to support you because they will hurt your enemies. If you haven't actually got any enemies, the first job of the populist is to pretend that you do. So you hate the elites, right? You hate that you don't know what that means, and you obviously get a little bit confused when people point out that a lot of the individuals in this country raging against the elites went to Eton College. One thinks of J-Dog himself, that great anti-elite campaigner with his hedge fund. And you think of the mainstream media, they're your enemy, despite the fact that almost all print media in this country actually worships at the altar of whoever their owners tell them to worship at. You need an enemy. And it upsets me and frightens me at the best of times because the enemy, as we've seen, moves effortlessly from Muslims to immigrants to people of colour to Black Lives Matter. And it's so depressing to watch it from the outside because you see decent people being terrorised. That's what propaganda is designed to do. But when you bring populism to coronavirus, as I think this government should be accused of doing, it gets much worse, doesn't it? Because the enemy is real and it's lethal. And yet the populists don't seem to me to have any tools to deal with real enemies. They are brilliant at stoking up our fear of and our antipathy towards invented enemies or exaggerated enemies or embellished enemies. So this is, I think, the breakdown of the idea that they can campaign but they can't govern. They're in constant campaign mode. And the best way, I think, to understand campaign mode is to see it as a attack upon the opposition, an attack upon the opponent. Look at Donald Trump at the moment. He's not saying anything about what he's going to do for America that might be construed as good. He's trying to pretend that Joe Biden has questions to answer about his business interests or about his fitness to govern. Nothing about, I don't know whether I'm being naive or nostalgic, but nothing about a vision. Nothing about vote for me and this will make America great again. It's not a vision. It's a graffito, and that seems to me to be the problem with what's happened here. It's exacerbated, of course, by the belief, and you might laugh at me for this, that there are people, even left over from the great cull of people with consciences and credibility after the December election result. There are people in the Conservative Party and in the upper echelons who must feel how awful this is. And yet they're silent because, of course, populism crushes its enemies as long as they're not real. So I think that's why. And at the moment, I'm not minded to mention any names, partly because I suppose it could be embarrassing, but also partly because I don't think that these people do it deliberately. I think they can't help themselves, you know. I think it is like a toolbox, and you can only work with the tools that are in it. But after 4 or 5 years of really weapons-grade populist ignorance, the media seems to be full of people who have decided to treat coronavirus in exactly the same way, which is why when the chief scientist comes forward and warns that we may soon, by mid-November, return to the 200-a-day death toll, and then we find ourselves before the end of October passing the 360 mark, I do wonder how much of the problem lies with people in my profession and less so on this particular issue, but also in politics, who keep insisting that the scientists are exaggerating, or the scientists are embellishing, or the scientists are scaremongering.